कर्मण्येवाधिकारस्ते मा फलेषु कदाचन मा कर्मफलहेतुर्भुः मा ते सङ्गोत्स्वकर्मणि।
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare.
Namaste. My name is Varja, and today, as you just heard, we have our panel dedicated to questioning and understanding the relevance of the Bhagavad Gita with youth in America. Youth like myself and our panelists, Bhushan and Kirtana. Growing up Hindu in America can be a little overwhelming at times. First or second generation kids like us have the struggle of two identities to balance as we come of age. We tend to be ridiculed by our peers if we are heavily involved in our culture or religion, mostly because we ourselves don't know how to properly explain the beauty of our culture to outsiders. Similarly, we're teased by family and those closest to us if we lean too American, because we come across as whitewashed, a term dreaded by all of us alike. Balancing these identities isn't always a win-win. I am not just Hindu, and I am not just American. I am both, and I am both equally. So in all of this, how do we discover a balance for ourselves? Many of you sitting in the audience today are parents bringing up your children in America, or our youth going through a personal crisis similar to Bhushan, Kirtana, and myself have experienced. And this balance is something that you strive for but can seem unattainable. If the question is if the Bhagavad Gita is relevant to youth today, I think all three of us will say yes. This panel will focus on what motivated us to reach for the Gita, how it helped us to find the balance of our own identities, and practical tips from a Hindu-American perspective. I'll let Kirtana and Bhushan introduce themselves.
Namaste, my name is Kirtana, and currently I'm a senior at Monte Vista High School. And I hope to pursue a career in either biological research or medicine. And just a little bit background about me. I was born here in the Bay Area, and I lived here till I was about 7. And that's when my parents decided that it would be a good idea if we moved to India, so that my brother and I would get to experience the Indian culture and really see what India is. And right before freshman year of high school, when I was 14, we moved back to the US because I wanted to go to high school and college over here. And I've been brought up in a very traditional Hindu family, and because of that, the Gita has always been a part of my life. Ever since I was a girl, even without my conscious knowing, I've heard verses from the Gita on TV, and my mom and my dad telling me about them. And the thing that's most important to me about the Gita is the path of righteousness, and the fact that if we do what is correct, the results will always be in our favor, and the fact that gratitude reciprocates and that God is always there for us as long as we're doing the right thing. Thank you.
Namaste. So my name is Bhushan. I just recently graduated from UC Davis with an aerospace engineering degree, so I'm currently looking for a job. Okay, so that's kind of my life right now. But a little bit of background on me: I was born and raised in San Jose, California, 20 minutes away from here. And my entire life as I was kind of growing up has been some way or another connected with the Bhagavad Gita. To be actually honest with you guys, as I was growing up, I actually hated anything Hinduism related. I didn't like the Bhagavad Gita, I didn't like any of that, because everything I knew about it I couldn't defend. And as I'm sure many of you, especially who are parents, know that for your kids, it's very difficult sometimes to go through school where kids are kind of constantly mocking how many devatas we have, or how some of our gods may have an elephant head, or why we do tilak. All of these different things are difficulties that I had to constantly face throughout my entire life. And so as I grew up older, as I got into high school, I was able to logically decipher and intellectually understand why the Bhagavad Gita is relevant. And as Vaija mentioned earlier, obviously the Gita is extremely relevant to me.
Awesome, thank you so much. So we all come from very similar backgrounds. I was born and brought up in the US as well. But we've all discovered the Gita in slightly different ways. So just to get things started for both Bhushan and Kirtana, what motivated you to reach for the Gita initially? Whether it's family background or otherwise.
I think it goes back to when I was younger, and I'm actually a very cocky person. I'm really egotistical, and I love to argue. And you know, some of you guys might have heard the argumentative Indian, right? Because I'm like the epitome of that. That's probably something that spurred me onto the Bhagavad Gita. Going to school, hearing people constantly mock my religion, my identity, my parents, the thoughts that I believe. It's infuriating, right? When you can't defend it. And so from that point, I only had one option. You have to go to the source, and the perfect source is the Bhagavad Gita. But even going to the Bhagavad Gita, for me at that time, I couldn't understand the Gita unless I read a translation from somebody. Or even if I looked into the translation of Shankaracharya, for example, I'm still reading a translation of his own words. So at that point, I had to take it up a notch. And the way that I did that was by actually learning Sanskritam and using that to understand the Bhagavad Gita in order to truly understand in Bhagwan's own words, in Arjun's own words, what exactly was happening and how that actually answers a lot of the questions that I was facing, that I had been asked as well.
So I've always been interested in Hindu mythology, and even when I was young, I used to read the Ramayana and Mahabharata and several different versions. And the latest one that I've read was when I was 12, and I read Rajaji's Mahabharatam, and I didn't understand a lot of it at that point, but I did finish the whole book. And at the end, there's when Krishna is showing Arjuna, and Arjuna's in a dilemma about what he needs to do at the war, whether it's right to kill people that who are family. And at that point, I understood, and I was very fascinated by what questions Arjuna was asking, what answers Krishna was giving. And at that point, I decided to read the Bhagavad Gita. And I just read it and didn't really understand what it was saying until like a year and a half later. So this was in India, and during the summer, this lady, she had like this Bhagavad Gita reciting, memorizing, and she taught us the 12th chapter, the Bhakti Yoga. And that's when I memorized all of the verses from that chapter and understood what it was saying. And I was fascinated by the epitome of our Indian culture, and that's when I started reading the Bhagavad Gita seriously, and it's what motivated me to continue reading it.
The Gita talks a lot about the concept of selfless service. You know, I know backstage we were talking a lot about seva and seva bhav, and also about material detachment. And in an age, especially with the millennial generation and all the stereotypes that go with being a millennial, you know, whether it's selfies or, you know, the digital age where we're constantly on Twitter and buying things, do you think it's possible for us to be detached from material objects to provide selfless service in our society as youth in America?
So I agree that it's possible, but especially the selfless service, it's ingrained into the American culture. We have a system of volunteering that's built into the system, and whether even you start that, I think, in middle school or even earlier. And in high school, it's a big part of giving back to the community. It's not just growing and succeeding as a person, but it's also giving back to the community that helped you get to that status. But I think that with the young people today, I've seen this a lot, the volunteering aspect, the actual volunteering is lost in the process of getting hours so that you can go to a good college. And I think that's something that needs to be reinstated into the system, but there's an existing working model that sets it up so that we can give back to our community as much as we want. And about the material detachment, this is something that I've struggled to understand for a very big part of my life. I still don't fully understand it. My mom's always talking about how you should never get attached to things or people and go overboard with your emotions. And this is I don't know if it's because I'm young or because of what you said about the technology age, but it's something that I find hard to deal with, and I don't understand it because I'm very attached to things from my childhood, and I would never want to give up like a doll that I had, or if I lived in a house, I don't want to move because that's where I grew up. And I'm working around my way and trying to figure out what it really means and trying to follow that in my life. So yeah.
For me, I have a very hard time with what material detachment means, but I'll share at least what I've come to understand, at least through the little experience that I've had. Material detachment is really, really hard. I mean, if you think about it, right now sitting here, I can feel my pocket buzzing because my phone is going off, and I'm sure a lot of you have that same thing, and just for us to be sitting there and like not pull out our phone, it's a trial. Let's be honest here, it's difficult, it's not easy. And so to live in a society, to live in America, especially being a second generation American, Indian American youth, it's very difficult. Where technology, where materialism is not only a part of my life, it is an integral aspect. And it is extremely difficult to have detachment in that sort of way. And so to go up to a youth in college and say, hey, material attachment, it's really good for you, it's probably not going to go so well. But I think the understanding of what is material attachment and how that can actually further our ability to do seva bhakti or any sort of bhakti is tremendous. Because if we think about what is material detachment, it doesn't necessarily mean that I have to give up all worldly possessions in the most extreme way possible. If we look at some of the avtaras, if we look at a lot of the acharyas, they all lived within society. Even Vivek, I mean, everybody that you can think about that we respect has lived within society, has interacted within society, and to think that those people had no care for any of us is not true. But how they were actually materialistically unattached is very, very important to understand, is that they were able to direct everything towards God. And in that way, we can also do bhakti, that let me think that I have my phone, but let me not be materially attached to it. Let me use that phone and let me connect with another human being based on the fact that he and I have one common blood maker, and let me bond with him over that. That in itself can be a different form of material attachment that we can at least consider.
I think this is one thing which we adults also have a lot of difficulty, because the interpretation is, it is not about detachment, but detached engagement. You are not giving up your material possessions, but you are not attached to it. Like for example, you just demonstrated by saying, I have the phone that is buzzing, but I am not taking it out and respecting other people, and I am listening to you instead of checking out my Facebook or my emails. That is an example of, you have the tools, you are not attached to them. You have the emotions, you have a dog, you are connected, you love. But only thing is, you don't go overboard and you let the attachment blind you so that your other dharma doesn't get in the way. So in that respect, I think in some of these things are confusion for adults as well as the kids. But what you are demonstrating is, you are practicing what you can, going back to the roots. How many of us go back to the roots and learn Sanskritam to understand what it exactly means, instead of understanding first level translation, second level translation, third level translation? I think what you are doing, that is where the what I admire, what you are doing. I think you have to keep working on it. The question is, when you give up, that is when the trouble begins. As long as you are trying it, there are lots of people. Janak Maharaj is supposed to be a great example of a person who was the king, but at the same time, he was also a Brahmarshi. So I think that is where I think some confusion need to be reduced and the guilt need to go away, saying you are trying your best, but keep asking the questions.
On that same note, with the concept of detachment by engagement or selfless service, I think all of us, in prior discussions have talked about how we've used the Gita to improve the community around us, right? There's, especially for us as youth, with social and digital being the way it is, we're able to connect with people countries away from us and engage in the troubles and hardships that they're enduring, as well as people in our own community. And the Gita offers us a book of choices, and how we address these choices, and how we weigh them, and our dharma dictates how we're going to address each of these choices. With that in mind, can you give one tangible example from your own experiences of when you've used teachings from the Gita to actively work on the society around you, whether it's friends or otherwise?
So for me, the easiest example, or the clearest example, and the most recent example comes from when I was in college. In college, the Bhagavad Gita is the last thought anybody has, to be honest, and it's quite a shame. And being in that sort of environment, that's always something that's in my mind, is that how can I bring the Bhagavad Gita, how can I make it more apparent that there is something here. Even Indian youth may have heard of the word Gita, may know that it's a book, but have never opened up the book. And so it's quite a shame. And so one of the experiences that I had was that me and a friend were just talking about the Bhagavad Gita, and we were actually at Starbucks. And we were just talking about some of the things in the Bhagavad Gita and thinking about how can we actually apply this in our lives. What does it mean to be materialistically detached was actually one of the things we talked about. And it just so turned out that there were actually two Indian people next to us who were listening to our conversation. And at that point, they actually got engaged into our conversation and started joining in. And in that simple way, we were able to get two new people who didn't know really anything about the Bhagavad Gita to kind of talk about it. And I think that's something really important, is that we need to be very confident in that. We need to know that we have a gem. India has something great to offer, and we have to be willing to talk about it, share about it. It's the greatest thing out there, and we should be confident in that. But that confidence is not there a lot of times, especially in the youth, because we're so uncertain. And so that's something that I've tried to do, is that making sure that I'm proud about what India has to offer, mainly the Bhagavad Gita, and to share that as much as I possibly can in whatever way I possibly can.
So as I mentioned earlier, I go to Monavista High, and it's known for putting a lot of pressure on its students because all of us aim to get 4.0s and good SAT scores so that we can go to great schools. And because of this, most of my friends, and I do too, we feel overwhelmed with the amount of work that we need to do, and we want to do justice to everything that we want to do. And this ends up making us feel like we have too much and can't do all of it. And the two things that I take away from the Bhagavad Gita are the fact that whatever you do, the fruit or the result of that will depend on the action, and that once you do the action, you give it 100%, you don't have to worry about the fruit, because God will, if you believe in Him enough, He will give you the results that you deserve, because He said that He would do that. And once we were having lunch, my Indian friends, and we were all stressing about finals and how we keep our A's and stuff. And this topic of the Bhagavad Gita and how these two things are part of the Bhagavad Gita came up. And we discussed this for our 45 minutes of lunch. And at the end of it, all of us were not as stressed as we were in the beginning, because we understood through discussion what it meant to do our work right with 100% effort, and how God would help us if we helped ourselves. And I feel like even though it was only a couple of us that were helped by that discussion, if enough people have conversations and see the truth that the Bhagavad Gita is telling us, it will spread and it will become part of any culture, not just Hindu culture, but throughout the world, because like someone said before, truth is truth no matter where, how old you are, whatever era you were born in. And I strongly believe that, so yeah.
And just to add a little bit of my perspective on this, right before we wrap up, you know, I was blessed to, similar to the both of you, grow up in a family that encouraged me to think of the Gita and about its teachings, past just being Indian, past just being Hindu, but towards the entire community that we are a part of. And you know, as I've grown up, I've learned that the best way that I can, you know, practice selfless service and give back to my community is to start the conversation of being a youth in America, growing up a little different, and having something to offer to everyone. And how can I share that knowledge with my peers who may not be Indian, who may not be Hindu, right? I think there's a lot going on in our society today that a lot of us have a lot to say about. And you know, whether it's racial issues or civil issues or other things, the Gita has a lot to say about it and a lot to teach us about love and acceptance and living a life, you know, void of anger, greed, and desire. And just spreading that attitude and living my life in a positive light, I think is the best service I can give to my community. So, just as an ending note, because I know we're running a little short on time here, very quickly, your top 2 tips for, I know we have a lot of parents in the audience, your top 2 tips for parents bringing up youth in America today, Hindu youth in America, from a kid's perspective.
So I'm 23 years old, and I don't really have authority to tell any of the parents here what to do, but here's what has worked for me. My parents, whenever I would ask them a question, they would do their due diligence and make sure that they came up with a really good answer. Many of the parents here, many of the panel members today have advanced degrees, and the amount of rigor that we put into our own profession, we can put into the Bhagavad Gita. So why is it that a tilak is in this particular way? Why is it in this particular location? What is the reasoning behind Ganesh having this particular head? All these things have intellectual and very logical reasons. And that's something that kept me willing to understand the Bhagavad Gita. Why do we do a particular puja this way? Why did it have to be this hand versus this hand? Why does it have to be this way? Why do you have to move the thali this way and not this way? These are very important things in our culture, and it is very hard to get somebody to agree, especially kids. It's very hard to say, you have to do it this way because I said it. That'll only last for so long until that tradition gets dropped, period. And that's not something we want, right? And so to give an intellectual understanding and reasoning to that child is extremely important. That's something that's worked with me. And the second thing is that kids and youth are full of energy. I see a bunch of kids running back outside right now, and from in the back. And so you guys know, for chasing after your own kids, how much energy youth have, how much energy kids have. Kids and youth should have an avenue to express that. you let the Gita be the guiding force to express that. So for me particularly, the only reason I'm able to stand here and speak about these things with the confidence that I have is that my parents got me involved in something. They got me involved into Swadhyay, which has been started by Pandurang Shastri Athavle. And because of that, I have mediums on how to actually express and practically apply to my life Sarva Sachaham Hridhi Sannivishta. How can I see the God within everybody else? Or Karmani Vadika Raste Mafaleshu Kadachana. How can I relinquish the fruits of my actions because I have a medium to express that? I'm young, I have energy. Your children are young and they have tons of energy, but they need an avenue to express that. Otherwise, it's just a river that has no bounds and it'll just go anywhere. They need to be guided. And I think that's the most important thing that parents can provide to.
I just have one thing to add to what Pushan said. So I know lots of people who want their kids to start reading the Bhagavad Gita, tell them to read like 2 chapters a day and understand everything that's saying. And practically speaking, and at least in America and in today's world, it's hard to do that. And I know that Mahatma Gandhi did this thing where he would read 1 shloka every day and understand it and apply it in his life that day and every day after. And I think that's a very good method to getting the kids interested in Bhagavad Gita, because once they learn it and understand it and actually see its application in the real world, it becomes easier to continue to doing that. And that works for me. I don't know a lot of shlokas, but everything that I do know, I apply to my life. And that's helped me continue wanting to learn the shlokas from the Bhagavad Gita. And I think that will help a lot of people because, like you said, if you force something on them, the immediate reaction is to not do what your parents want you to do, especially if it's something that you don't fully understand. So I think taking a few shlokas and understanding them and applying them will really help them spread the message of the Bhagavad Gita.
One more thing is, living in the Bay Area, we are in a very lucky part of the world because, for example, the organizations like Yoga Bharati or Samskrita Bharati, these are actually going much deeper to help parents to walk the talk, parents to learn the understanding of the shlokas in a way they can apply it, because when we walk the talk, our children practice it a lot more. So find out about these organizations. There are some wonderful ways in which this great conference can continue to live in your life if you go back and explore what is this Yoga Bharati doing beyond the asanas. How are they helping us to do it? What is the Samskrita Bharati that is teaching even Americans to learn Sanskritam at any age so that you can actually get to the roots of Bhagavad Gita, understand the slokas and do this. So some of these, if you can take it as inspiration to practice, chances are your children will also get inspired to walk with you, go with you and learn with you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And I think just for the few youth that are here, as well as for the parents, the power of social is amazing. You can connect with other youth who maybe aren't right close to you, but can definitely connect with you and understand where you're coming from and the pain of the identity crisis that we face. Connect with them. Encourage your children to connect with other children who are going through the same thing. Social does amazing things to connect us all, and the Gita, we can have a conversation about it. And if that's where we start a conversation, then that's the best place to start. With that being said, I think we're ready to hand off. Yeah.
कर्मण्येवाधिकारस्ते मा फलेषु कदाचन मा कर्मफलहेतुर्भुः मा ते सङ्गोत्स्वकर्मणि.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare
Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare